Welcome to Canada, David.
Thank you.
I know you've been here many times.
That was a long title page, a testimony to age.
But it's missing a very important recent title that you've been granted by the current President of the United States.
Yes, I don't repeat that one. But I just want to say this. Thank you for inviting me here to explain American politics. I came anyway.
Settle in, everybody.
I came anyway.
Yeah.
I want to dispel this rumor that I'm up here scouting for property and exploring asylum laws.
It's great to see you again, my friend. It's been too long. You know, last year, one of the only complaints we got about the first Canada-US summit was, strangely, given the business we're all in, there wasn't enough politics. So I'm going to ask you to kick us off here, David, by explaining the politics of your home country. And how did we get where we are?
Well, do you want me to talk about where the race is, or because I'm happy to talk about, listen, where we are is that we have a country where 65% of people feel like we're on the wrong track. Despite America's, I think, stellar performance in many ways, people are very unhappy with the economy because they're looking at it through the prism of their own costs. I think I said to you yesterday, I feel deeply about democracy and what's at stake in this election. But if you're talking about democracy over the dinner table, it's probably because you don't have to worry about the cost of the food that's sitting on it. And I think this is the culmination of a bunch of jarring experiences that we all shared, but globalization has created a lot of winners and losers. That's one element of this. We had 9/11 and 20 years of war. We had a catastrophic financial crisis in 2008, and then, of course, the pandemic. And the tumult of the Trump years as well. So there is a lot of disquiet. It's particularly felt among the young. So that takes me to this race. You can, but if I were to bet today, and the election's not today, I think Donald Trump would win today. And this is a sophisticated audience, so you know Joe Biden won by 7 million votes, popular votes, in 2020. But really, he won by the margin of 45,000 votes in 3 states because we elect by an electoral college, each state being assigned electors consistent with their population. And the states of Arizona and Georgia, combined with Wisconsin, by a combined 45,000 votes, chose Joe Biden. Yeah. So it was a very close election. We're a deeply polarized country. We Americans who live in 43 or 44 states that aren't battleground states, really in contention, watch from a distance as a few million Americans decide who the next president's going to be. And right now, Trump is even or ahead in every one of those battleground states. And it's particularly pronounced in 3 states that Biden carried, one of which wasn't considered a battleground state last time, Nevada, a smaller state, then Arizona and Georgia. He's got more than a trivial lead there, flirting with the margin of error and some over the margin of error in others. It's closer in the northern tier states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And that's interesting, and it speaks to sort of what's happened in our electorate, because those are whiter states. Biden won African-American voters by 75% in 2020. He's now got a lead of more like 50%. He carried young people under 29 by 24%. They're running closer to even now. He carried Hispanic voters by 65%. With 65%, that's basically even right now. And that's really the story here. So he's actually disadvantaged in Nevada and Arizona because of the erosion of Hispanic support, and in Georgia because of the disaffection of particularly younger black men. And so Biden really needs an inside straight. He has to carry those 3 northern states.
Yeah.
And right now, they are very, very close. They're all within a point. And some of them, I mean, one of them, Michigan, there are particular problems neighboring you. You're not the problem. But there's a large Arab American population around Detroit, very enraged about the war. Yeah. And there is which has divided Jews as well. And then there's a concern about turnout in Detroit among African American voters and other communities among African American voters. So right now, Trump has an advantage.
Yeah, and you're painting a picture of which is really the product of a longer term problem, in my view, something you and I have discussed many times over the years, and that is the inability of the Democratic Party in your context and parties on the center left everywhere to connect with their traditional constituency on economics.
One of the reasons Biden's numbers have held up to the extent they have, and this is a very close race, is he's done better with college-educated white voters, particularly.
Most of the people in this room?
Yes, exactly. You are the base. And the Democratic Party still retains its sense of identification with working people, but it's changed in tone. The Democratic Party Democratic Party too often, in my view, approaches, blue-collar workers, rural voters, farmers, and others, as kind of Margaret Mead would approach the natives. It's like, we are here to help you become more like us. We're going to get you out from whatever you're doing.
That's very judgy, right?
Yes, I mean, implicit in that is what you do is not really worth much.
Right.
And there is a lack of dignity associated with that. And when you combine that with trends in the economy, cultural trends, there is a sense of not just disillusionment, but aggrievement that Donald Trump is expert at mining. And I think that's a lot of what you see, but it's been building for a long time. And the evidence that it's been building is that America isn't the only place this is happening. This is a global phenomenon. He is just a particularly luminescent character.
You mean that literally in some cases?
Yeah.
I want you to put a bit of a feat of imagination here, David. So I want you to put yourself in the shoes of running strategy for both campaigns. And
at the same time?
Let's start with Trump, because I think that's harder.
Yeah.
What's your message in the closing?
Well, it's not harder, and I'll tell you why. I mean, the thing we haven't mentioned, I mean, these are the 2 least popular candidates in the history of American politics, in the history of polling. Trump's for the obvious reasons. Biden, a lot because of age, and a sense that he has, despite what I think is a very admirable record, is not really with it or in control. And it has a lot to do with his performance in front of cameras and his gait and so on. So the Trump message and the Republican message is crystal clear, which is the world's out of control and Biden's not in command. Trump is strong, Biden is weak. And the issues, when you're running a campaign for President of the United States, it's unlike running for the United States Senate or some other offices. There has to be a narrative, not just issues. And issues should animate the narrative. In Trump's case, you know, they are working the border issues very hard. Obviously, inflation, because that is the number one issue, and it's a driver of vote. And then urban crime. We just saw, you know, it must be terribly frustrating for Biden because, you know, there were new crime statistics just today that showed a dramatic drop in homicides and so on. But the kind of crimes that we've seen since the pandemic in local communities and metropolitan areas have been more smash and grab, kind of strong arm robbery, car theft, that are quality of life issues. You know, less death, but more intrusion in ways that are, and Trump has, you know, I mean, I don't know why anybody lives in the United States if they listen to Donald Trump describe it. But he is riding it hard. So the danger for Trump's campaign is not the campaign and the message, it's Trump himself.
Right.
I mean, and I'm setting aside all the legal difficulties and so on, but he, as a performer, can be very, very
Compelling.
And scary.
And scary.
And scary. You know, there was a focus group that I was privy to of swing voters, and there was a guy who had voted for Trump in 2020, and he said he wasn't sure he was going to do it again, and they said, why? And he said, because living with Trump as president is like having a neighbor who runs his leaf blower 24/7. And I thought that was a wonderful description. And so, you know, I don't think his campaign wants him out there talking about vengeance and retribution. I don't think they want all of his advisors or putative advisors out there talking about, you know, destroying the pillars of democracy, you know, and essentially investing the president with almost, you know, princely powers and so on. But the one effect, he was convicted, everyone knows this, 34 counts in New York. The question was, will it affect voters? I think it's marginally helped Biden, but the biggest effect may be how it affects Trump. Because he is more angry, more vengeful, more paranoid now. And you could see it, he was out in Vegas on Sunday, and if you really want a mind-bending experience, watch the whole, you know, 2-hour speech in 100-degree heat.
I saw the boat part.
The what?
The part about the boats.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Drowning because of batteries, choosing.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was like, I felt like I was at a Grateful Dead concert next to, actually, it's more like sitting next to a guy on a bar stool. It's like the guy you never want to be on the bar stool next to you, who won't shut up and is completely nuts.
Yeah, and despite all this, you just picked him as the likely next president of the United States?
Well, I said if the election were today, these factors will enter into it, and I just don't think that you can rely entirely on him defeating himself. And Jerry, there are going to be a series of things coming up, starting with the debate on June 27th, that we know are going to be impactful. The debate, obviously, his selection of a vice presidential candidate. Will it be a reassuring person to people who aren't quite sure about Trump? I kind of think he's going to go in that direction. I thought for the longest time that he'd pick Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, because he's African American, and Trump is, as I mentioned earlier, doing better than Republicans generally do among younger black men, and Scott would be a good ambassador, and he'd send a signal to people who worry about Trump being a racist that maybe he's not.
Yeah.
I'd need more evidence, but I don't think it's going to happen. Trump, and you saw it the other day, you keep seeing these references. Well, he said about Mike Pence in 2016, he's out of central casting. Trump, he approaches these things like a casting director. So he's watching these Sunday shows and he's judging each person's performance and so on. I'm kind of wondering whether he doesn't land on Governor Burgum of North Dakota, who's not terribly exciting, but he's solid. Yeah. He's not going to blow you up. He'll be loyal. And he's got attributes that Trump admires. He's very successful, got a lot of money. And not only does Trump admire it, but he wants a lot of that money.
Of course. Yeah.
For this campaign. So that would be my guess. But look, I don't know. I can't crawl into Trump's head. I'm not eager to do it.
Well, let me put it this way. We heard from people who were in a position to know that is almost precisely the basis on which he chose Mike Pence. That he looked like a vice president.
Well, he had another reason that has now become moot, which was Pence was his sort of ambassador to the evangelical community. And it was really stunning to see in the Iowa caucuses that Trump, I think he was, you know, in the 50s or 60s among evangelical voters, and Pence was down there at like 3%. That must have been stinging to Mike Pence, because Trump is a guy who's violated 11 of the 10 commandments and still has won the hearts and minds of evangelical voters who do feel besieged, and he ties into that sense of besiegement. That's his superpower.
Theologically besieged.
Yeah.
So we've got
Or culturally besieged.
We've got 8.5 minutes to to focus the Biden campaign.
I was hoping I could keep talking.
All friends.
Look, I mean, I said that campaigns are about narratives. I don't exactly know what the narrative of the Biden campaign is. I think what he'd like it to be is the democracy narrative, which is an absolutely legitimate concern in my view. The rule of law. I mean, Trump reaffirmed on Sunday that he would pardon the January 6th rioters. You know, he exalts them as patriots, and he would, of course, vacate the cases against himself, which would be an incredible blow to the rule of law and the idea that no one's above the law. But setting all of that aside, I don't know. I think you're going to get the people who worry about that, and you may sway some. But the people who are hanging out here are low information voters who are very much motivated by the economy and other issues. And you know, obviously, abortion rights will be important. That'll be helpful. I mentioned Arizona and Nevada. Those states will have initiatives on the ballot to codify abortion rights in those states. That might get some voters out, but he doesn't really have a consistent message. You can't stop someone on the street and say, well, what is Biden's message? Right. That worries me as a strategist, and I think he better figure it out between now and next, you know, the debate on June 27th. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, you know, Trump has created an image of Biden that is so enfeebled, except when Trump is describing him as the mastermind of a national plan to control local prosecutors in the Justice Department. Other than that, he calls him a guy who can't tie his own shoe. Yeah. And so he set the bar pretty low for Biden, and on that level, all Biden has to do is survive, and that will be helpful to him. But I do think he has to advance a message, and it has to be a comparative message, and it has to be about the future. Biden is very proud of what he's done, and he's often telling us how well he's done.
Classic incumbent problem.
It is a classic incumbent problem. It's why incumbents tend to do poorly in first debates. So he's got to resist all of that and turn it into a comparative process on stuff that people care about, and to get people thinking about what their future is going to be like under one scenario and another scenario. I mean, on things like healthcare and taxes and you know, a variety of quality of life issues. He's in one place, Trump is in another, and he's in the right place. And he needs to show some of that world-class empathy that he's famous for, that is less obvious when he is talking about his achievements. you know, the most important message you can deliver to any politician, you know this, you're a master strategist, is it ain't about you.
Yeah.
You know?
Ain't that the case?
Yeah.
So how does his team get Joe Biden out of his own head then?
Well, that's a question. You know, he has a lot of confidence in his own political instincts, and
it's amazing how that grows the longer they're.
Well, you know, the thing about being president of the United States is people tend to blow a lot of smoke up your butt.
Yeah.
And after a while, you know, you can't help but inhale something.
Hey, it's smoky in here. How did it happen?
Exactly, exactly. So that's part of the problem. But part of it is this issue of pride that I said. He feels like he led the country through the pandemic and an economic crisis, landed it well, that he's restored credibility among world leaders, pulled the allies together around Ukraine. You know, but here's one of the interesting things, and this is just an aside that I've been thinking about. This is a fundamentally anti-institutional time, and you guys all know this because you face it in your own work, but people are jaundiced about institutions. We did a poll for the Institute of Politics, and we had agree or disagree statements, and one of them is the government is corrupt and rigged against people like me. That got 56%. So people are very jaundiced about institutions, and Trump is obviously a battering ram against all rules, laws, norms, and institutions. Biden is the ultimate institutionalist.
Yeah.
He grew up in these institutions. He reveres these institutions. He can't understand why anybody would support taking them apart. He's got to sort of pivot away a little from that and talk about the fights he's fighting for people and who he's fighting for, and make the case, he's starting to, that I'm fighting for you, he's fighting for him.
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental difference between these two candidates.
That almost sounds like a good narrative.
Yeah, well, I think it is part of that narrative.
Yeah.
You know, I'd say two things. Bill Clinton, who was in many ways a political genius, said two things that have stuck with me throughout this race. One is elections are always about the future, and the other, and that should be helpful to Biden despite his age because of Trump's obsession with his own past. Yeah. And then the second is...
Although it is hard to talk about the future when people assume you have very
Yes,
little
of course. But that's true of both of them, and I would acknowledge that if I were him. Neither of them are going to be around that long. I mean, this is not about their future, it's about our future, and I think I would be very direct about that. I mean, you don't have to be an actuary to figure that out. But the second thing that Clinton said, and this should be a concern to Biden, is that strong and wrong beats weak and right. And that is a real danger for Biden in this race. And he's going to have to overcome that. And the last thing I'll say, I know the clock's running down, is the thing you worry about is...
Well, I have one more question for you, by the way.
Well, then I'll keep talking. The thing that you worry about in presidential races is not the things you can control, but also the things that you don't know are going to happen, world events, you know, domestic events. I think before the midterms, the fact that, you know, in a tragic event that Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, was assaulted in their home and almost killed, I think that actually influenced the outcome of the midterms because that showed the hard edge of extremism, and people were, you know, now Trump is invoking you know, he's provoking, I should say, people all the time. What happens if there is an egregious, I hope that doesn't. You know, we live in a world now where renewed concern about terrorism from abroad is an issue. If that happens, what does that do? What is the economy going to do? You know, by the way, we had, you know, in 2008, I thought we ran a pretty good campaign, but it really ended when Lehman Brothers collapsed.
Yeah.
So, you know, you just don't know what's going to happen. I do, one of my cautionary notes is about the Democratic Convention, however. I do worry about massive protests.
1968, all over.
Yes, yeah, we have tremors thinking of 1968 in Chicago. I don't think it's going to be quite that, but I think there are a lot of folks who are going to be trying to provoke it, you know, who are not of necessarily focused on the issues, but focused on trying to create chaos. What was your last question?
Oh yeah, nice. Had 4 seconds left on the clock in the ambassador stand. It's actually an important question, so I am going to ask you. You've occupied one of the most coveted offices next to the most coveted office in the country, and a lot of Canadians.
It was small, but good real
It's
estate.
very small, no windows, but
Yeah,
excellent real estate. I've seen other occupants of that office who
Yeah.
were less conversational than you are, David. The question I have is, what, if anything, do the people in that office think about Canada?
Well, you know, I mean, positively, you know, and we were excited about the change of leadership there when you guys came in, and we always thought of Canada as a strong and important ally. But, you know, in some ways, you suffer from, you know, not being a squeaky wheel. I mean, you know, and I think you heard a little of that from Senator Coons.
Yeah.
You know, I think we too often take Canada for granted. We won't, depending on how this election goes. I think the giant sucking sound may be north. But seriously, I think one thing that should be clear, given the state of affairs in the world, is that alliances matter. And alliances on your own continent matter even more. And we should treasure and value this relationship and treat you with respect as a partner, because we need each other. And that, I think, was emphasized in the discussion last night. You know, I think that that has been made clear to this administration. You know, I can't speak for the next.